afternoon, everybody. There was a fascinating speech before this. So what we want to talk today is about the FinTech industry trends and kind of broadly kind of the implications for, for the space and for opportunities in the space. By way of introduction, my name is Dilip Venkatachari. I'm with McKinsey and work with clients on a variety of topics, including payments-related topics. And prior to that, spent a career building payment solutions that many of you use. Built a company that essentially is the backbone of most US payments that you probably never see, but a company called Cashish that runs most of the back-end payments and mobile payments and so forth. And then led PayPal's risk management and served on the board of PayPal Europe, and then launched Google Payments. So I can speak to a lot of the consumer trends to the extent you have questions, but more interestingly, we have a kind of very august panel here, so let them introduce themselves.
Oh, hi, I'm Bill Doolin. It's great to be here. I am a vice president in charge of our commercial payments division, and I also spend time looking at potential FinTech ventures that we would want to acquire or invest in.
Awesome. Hey guys, my name is Dan McCoskey and I'm a designer, but in deference to this august group, I put a sport coat on today to be a little bit more entrepreneurial and businesslike. 3 weeks ago, I launched my own company called Garage Partners. It's a consultancy where I consult with folks in design and innovation. Before that, I worked at Capital One as their first vice president of design. And before that, I worked at this little company called Google doing something called Project Aura, a modular smartphone.
Hi everyone, I'm John Canfield and I'm the VP of Risk Management at WePay. WePay is a payments company that helps platforms, marketplaces, crowdfunding sites, business tools offer payments to their customers. And prior to WePay, I spent 7.5 years at eBay managing risk and fraud prevention for their marketplaces division.
Thank you. I want to make this panel very interactive, so I'll just ask a few questions of the panelists, and then please feel free to kind of jump in and take the discussion away. First question for the panel is really, what kind of trends do you see in consumer and business from a payment standpoint as you see the latest kind of trend shaping it?
I mean, there's two things. I mean, from the last talk, we saw a lot about identity, and I think identity is transformative in this space. If you can know who someone is reliably, I mean, that's one of the core ingredients for a trusted transaction. And I think, as much as I'm excited about commerce identity, I feel like we need a broader approach that's multi-company, multi-industry. And some of the most exciting examples are actually coming out of places like MIT. There's this area called multi-factor authentication. So, we all know about passwords, and we probably have not too much love for passwords. But imagine many different types of ways of understanding who you are working together to identify who you are. So you guys may know the work of Sandy Pentland out of MIT, where he used gait analysis, the way that you walk and the places you go as a way of knowing who you are, the way that you type, the way that you talk, face recognition, thumbprint, right? All of these things can work together. And the holy grail is when you don't even have to think about a password or a PIN or a moment of authenticating yourself. And then the second thing that I'm excited about are technologies that go beyond the cash register. As awesome as it is to do Apple Pay or Samsung Pay, I feel like the fact that we have a device in our pockets that is more sophisticated and sometimes more costly than the register that we're waiting to queue up in front of leads to completely new ideas of how to use technology for payment. What I want to do is shoplifting, legal shoplifting. I want to walk into a store, grab objects, and walk out. And there's a couple of technologies on the future that can help with that.
Fascinating.
I think from the perspective of a financial institution, the regulatory scrutiny is going to continue to grow. So, as we innovate and come up with new ways to make payments, we innovate first, but think of the regulators later. But I can tell you the regulators will be there, right? So really need to pay attention to what's going on in that space.
Actually, if I can just push on that topic before coming back to you here. On regulation, there's a huge change in the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years since the crisis, and that has shifted the profit pools around quite a bit. away from the traditional sources of financial services to new ones. Can you comment on what that means for if someone here is looking at opportunities in the space? Where might that lead to?
I think what we notice the most, or at least of what I've been looking at in the space that I am, traditional payment networks, traditional banks, they're used to very rich margins, right? And so for them to innovate, they would be cutting into their own profit pools. So I think that's one area, but I think it's a new reality that the richness that was in payments before from a profit perspective is going away. And it will be thin margins and to deal with the regulation, to deal with the security, right?
Got it. And so, along with the previous comment, basically look for new opportunities like identity or new consumer experiences. Right. Anything else we should be thinking about from a payment standpoint?
Yeah, two things. It's very interesting, the previous panel about community. And we had Varsha from Airbnb talking about the Airbnb community and all that goes into it in terms of helping people safely experience other cities. But the foundation to that is an ability to provide payment acceptance to thousands or millions of individuals who have never considered themselves businesses before. And that's a major trend. More and more marketplaces, more and more business tools are providing payments deeper and deeper into the infrastructure. And there are a lot of challenges to that. At the same time, the other trend is fraud. And I'm in the risk management business, and I always hate to say to people who are thinking of risk management as a career is like, unfortunately, this career is going to last for a long time. The fraudsters are not going away, and even as we get more multi-factor authentication, the sophistication of fraudsters and the different techniques they have to, rootkit your Android phone or, all sorts of different techniques makes it very challenging. And this also makes it challenging from a regulatory point of view. It's maybe not only fraudsters, but it's also terrorists, who are looking to infiltrate the payment system. So on one hand, we have a great opportunity, more and more individuals being able to receive payments, but we have more and more threats that we have to be able to manage as well.
So what I take away is one advice to everyone: if you're looking for career security, consider risk management. One thing both of you kind of addressed a little while ago was kind of the emerging consumer experience importance, and we heard that in the Amazon presentation as well. Can you speak to how design thinking is coming in, and what's the implication of that for folks in the room?
Yeah. Well, actually, first, how many of you, raise your hands if you're in the audience and you believe that you are in FinTech, in the industry of FinTech somehow? Yeah, okay. And actually, I think we would probably like to say we are in #FinTech, because FinTech is kind of cool right now. I mean, you saw the last presentation, what was it, $19 billion in 2015. And when I left Google to go to work for a bank, I actually had the flexibility to work on anything I wanted. But I asked Capital One, what do you want me to focus on? And they said, we want you to work on #FinTech, because you're in Silicon Valley, you're from Google, we're a bit more of a, not an old bank, but we think in old banking ways. And the first person I hired on my team was a PhD social anthropologist who has superpowers in understanding people. And we went into people's homes. And when you talk to everyday people, you realize that people aren't asking for more blockchain, security in their banking infrastructure. They're not asking to shave off milliseconds from their payment process to tap with NFC. What we found is that people could barely talk about money in a healthy way. There is no public education around financial health. Our parents probably fought about money more than they taught us how to build it well. And we realized that we actually had to think of a different hashtag. So we focused on #FinMotion, to focus on the emotions that people feel when dealing with money. And that I feel like if we address those, amazing things will happen. And my last comment here is, it's interesting the language that we use to talk about people. We talk of them as consumers or users for many of us in software. And I only know a couple industries that use the word user to describe the people they focus on: the drug industry and software. It's like, great. Like, I only care about you when you're pressing the buttons in my app. These are people that we're talking about. And if we recognize that those people have a life, they have goals and dreams, I think that is the right starting point to then find innovative technologies and business models to make people's lives better.
It's quite fascinating. Any advice? This, I think many of the folks in the room are either many in the fintech industry, but looking to start either new enterprises or new initiatives in their companies. Any advice for folks looking at how to apply, for example, design thinking in the broader context? What does it mean for for people and their jobs and their careers?
I mean, what I love about startups is that they actually are much more integrated than large companies. Right? If you're at a larger company, you have a design department that you work with, and that's the creative part of your organization. And then there's the finance people, and they deal with all the money, and they wear suits and you work with spreadsheets. But when you're a startup person, you're scrappy, you're time-bound, your funding's about to run out. And I live in Palo Alto, and I like to go to Coupa Cafe, where there's a bunch of startup folks just hanging out, using free Wi-Fi. And then they'll bring people over from the next table over and say, hey, can you check out this app? What do you think? And because they're so scrappy, they're naturally reaching out to people to see what their reactions are. So my advice is, and actually design thinking as a movement is less focused on designers, right? The Stanford D School is actually focused more on MBAs and engineering students and folks outside of design, which I think is really healthy. So my advice to any of you guys is, don't wait to find a designer or feel like you have to become trained as a designer. Just start connecting with people in an authentic way, and amazing things will happen.
Quite fascinating. And you were talking earlier about your experiences as you got into the industry. Would you share that?
In terms of risk management and fraud, yes. So it's interesting because I think that fraud and fraud prevention and thinking the way that a fraudster does is something that unfortunately we're needing to do more and more. But the good news about it is that there are whole ecosystems of businesses that are specializing in this and providing tools in this. So there are two opportunities. One is there are a lot of opportunities in risk management. You can start companies if you have experience in this in the risk management field. On the other hand, if you don't have as much direct experience, but you're creating a community and you realize that your community may be susceptible to fraud or other type of criminal behavior, you should reach out to the ecosystem of providers and experts who can help you put controls in place. One of the key problems you have is you can very, very quickly in the course of a day go from no problem to gigantic problem. It's very nonlinear. You could have fraudsters don't realize you're there. Fraudsters are exploiting you like crazy. So make sure you're connected to people and an ecosystem and providers who can help protect you.
Thank you. Any questions? By the way, don't want to go ahead.
You look cool, you have dress, and you have good thinking and background. In terms of the signature that you're talking about, it's not a paper signature, but the whole persona is the signature. And now, how do you use the different metrics to different aspects of the signature, components of the signature, and how do people can wait, and someone may be a little drunk, and when they are trying to go access, and is not able to computer access to perimeter security, building security, all kinds of things.
Right.
How do you kind of put a variation because you have not tested them in not the normal way?
So I think so the question for those of you who couldn't hear was basically about authentication, new forms of authentication. And for example, how do you test them? How do you measure them? How do you enable those to be effective when used with the minor human variances that always crop up and kind of when humans use it?
Yeah. I'm not actually an expert in this space, but I'll give you just a high-level view of the approach that I've seen security experts take. I used to work with folks who used to run DARPA, and they actually had some hackers on our team, which It was actually interesting. The day that the iPhone came out with Touch ID, the hacker taught us in a day how to spoof someone's fingerprint with a lemon rind and get into anyone's phone. It was a pretty awesome team.
They forgot to tell the FBI that.
That's right. That's right. So there's something in the world of authentication called guessing entropy. Guessing entropy is basically, it's the amount of force required to spoof someone, right? So, guessing entropy, there's this whole thing about the San Bernardino phone and Apple and whether, there should be tools to unlock it. So it takes a certain amount of force to be able to guess all the possible combinations that were used on the password of that phone. When you use multiple factor authentication, your guessing entropy gets higher and higher if you can tap into those. So the way that you're walking, the way that you're typing, the way that you're moving, the way that you the way that you move throughout this world, those can get stacked up on top of each other. And there's a metric which is basically a 4-digit PIN is kind of industry standard entropy. So if you go below that for any reason, let's say I've turned off my camera, or I don't want you to track how I walk, or then there's a fallback. And you guys all have done this who use Touch ID today, right? There's the fallback is you have to put in a PIN or a password. So in the future, I think it'll be more multi-device. Right now, it's fairly limited to your own personal smartphone, and that has its own vulnerabilities. But actually, if you want to see a great talk about this, watch Google I/O last year. Gave ATAP, the Advanced Technology and Projects Group, gave a talk about multi-factor identification. And check it out. Those guys really know what they're talking about.
Do you have any perspectives from to add to this from Discover?
I think what we all kind of need to remember in this group is, I know everybody doesn't do payments every day like we do, but the payment itself is a commodity in the financial institution world, right? It's the ability to, the Uber experience, right? The payment seamlessly, but your ride showed up, right? It's the amount of data that you could put with that payment, and I think embedded in that data is really where, we could see some advancements in this idea of authentication.
I'd like to comment, certainly having more data sources, multiple factors, helps you overcome the imperfections of any one method, right? No method is going to be perfect. I think a lot of people, as we get more biometrics, think, oh, wow, that's going to be great because I'm going to have biometrics. The one caution is, at least with a password, if it gets stolen, you can reset it. What happens if someone has created this lemon rind that has your fingerprint on it, and now it's like, are you going to reset your fingerprint? So no one thing is going to be perfect. It's the combination of a lot of different data that you could build a secure system from.
Any other questions?
So my question is, when you talk about user experience, you want to get more seamless and one tab, checkout, one tab account creation, etc. And then you talk about fraud and regulation. It's like, how can I get your fingerprint? How can I get your DNA? How can I get more information from you? How do you guys see both of these streams coming together over time?
Balancing the different needs of kind of regulatory KYC and everything else for more information versus less user kind of inclination to do it.
Yeah. I can give an example of that. I mean, what I find is the most helpful in risk management is to look at the activity that that someone is trying to do and get information from that activity. So I'll give you one example. We work a lot with crowdfunding sites. So GoFundMe is one of our large partners that we work with. And crowdfunding is based on communicating through social media, through Facebook. Okay, you have a need or your friends have a need and you post on social media. So the interesting thing is social media, your Facebook account itself is as good an ID as any passport or driver's license because it took you years to build. You have hundreds of friends, you have all this activity on it. So it's actually not trivial for somebody else to build a realistic looking Facebook account for yourself. So if you can utilize sources of information that already are critical for that activity, then you can get a lot of information. Another example is we work with invoice software companies. Invoices themselves, lots of information in there. It's a shared contract between the buyer and seller. So if you get these sources of information that are already happening as part of the transaction, it's like Bill said, it's the stuff beyond the dollars and cents of the transaction. It's the context for this transaction. That could give you a lot of data to help you do risk management.
Just to add one more to that, one of the interesting things we found was when we were at PayPal, the most interesting risk determinant was not really your identity, but how much time you took on the last I do page, the confirm page. Because it turns out that the big difference between someone who's fraudulent and who's not is everyone has buyer's remorse, and so they slow down on the last page. Whereas if you are just sitting in Ukraine and doing 10,000 cards a minute, it doesn't really matter. You'll kind of go through them very quickly. So a lot of determinants for risk that have little to do with direct consumer identity. Yeah. You had one more question there? I know we're almost running out of time. Go ahead, I'll repeat it just.
Hi, my name is Sanjay Mathur, and I actually just completed my degree at the University of Toronto last week in industrial engineering. And so all this is really fresh in my mind. And one of the questions I had for Dan, which you had mentioned before, is what we learned for the iterative design cycle for designing apps and other technology for users is to come up with personas, understand their goals, understand their aspirations, as you were mentioning, in order to come up with what we should design for them. But we're still treating them as users. So I wanted to know if you could expand a little bit on what you meant by what are the gaps that we currently face by just treating them as users, and what you could see potentially if we were to change that thinking and think more about them as people.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I think we're at the very beginning of a completely new revolution in thinking about humans. Like, I feel like right now we're at the kind of the tail end of the industrial revolution in the way that we think, right? I mean, I don't know, like my phone today, I kind of like it. Now that after I left Google, I went back to the dark side, the light side. I'm not quite sure what side it is. But this object is designed, at least the physical side of it, to be beautifully reproduced millions of times. This one iconic Johnny Ive designer-infused object. And what's really interesting is that really contrasts with when you turn this on and you see what's on the screen. My collection of little squares is totally different than the collection of little squares of anyone here. Software is actually really malleable. So I guess here's what I'm feeling is that when we view people as consumers, then all the practices of the Industrial Revolution make sense, right? Henry Ford and the assembly line and mass manufacture make a lot of sense. When you think about humans as creators and a creative force, new processes take place. So I would say that the traditional design model, that's a little bit of like define who you're designing for, create some iconic representations of your object, test it with them, see what they think, and adapt, are going to give way to something more creative. So Project Aura is one example. So how many of you, raise your hand if you know what Project Aura is. All right, raise your hand if you've ever heard of something called phone blocks. Okay, so no one knows what I'm talking about. Okay, so there's this, imagine a phone, married Lego, and they had a child. So you have a phone where you can actually, anytime, swap out the pieces and parts of that phone based on your scenario. Maybe, something breaks, you don't have to get rid of the whole thing, you just change that part. So when I designed that phone at Google, it was exactly the opposite process that Johnny Ive and team at Apple were taking. To create one singular object, I was trying to make it impossible for anyone to create the same object again. So I think, meet me afterwards, we can talk some more philosophy here, but I would just encourage everyone to explore where the final product leaves space for the people who use it to have their personality come through.
Thank you. And we're supposed to be out of time, but I'll take one last question. No problem.
What I'm hearing is that payments is a commodity and payments is a margin business emerging. Then why is so much, almost half of the FinTech investment globally are going in payments?
I think it has to be, right? You have to have that transaction that takes place, whether you're buying something on Amazon or it's a very large buyer paying their suppliers, right? So it's necessary, right? But you know, we want to make it easier, but you know, we talked a little bit about the design, but when you get to the regulatory and the banking side of it, right, to be more sophisticated and more thoughtful, you really, what I like to term as purposeful friction. So the really smart folks are out there going against the fraudsters, right, to figure out that when this happens, a triggering event then either stops the payment or changes the way it goes. So when you're talking a consumer payment that's $50, $75, $100 is much different when you're moving millions of dollars in the B2B space. So that purposeful friction, that thoughtfulness, you know, and how we do that, and I think that's where the money's going, right? If you follow the money, that's kind of the piece.
And it also relates to the fact that, as you said it earlier, it is something that everyone does all the time. And there are pain points that are not yet solved. With that, I think I've had 3 signs for time over. So thank you very much, and thanks for all your.
Thank you.